This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today I have a UFO related guest who is going to be appearing at Contact in the Desert coming up in California in late May, early June. I've seen a bunch of his films lately and a bunch of his podcasts. He's done over 15 feature-length documentaries. He's based in Vancouver, British Columbia now. He's an expert in underwater UFOs, unidentified submerged objects, volcanoes, and UFOs, which I didn't even know there was a correlation, and I'm very interested in this now until I started looking up your documentaries and UFOs on the moon and things like that. So, Darcy Weir, how are you doing today, sir?
Hey, well, how you doing, man? I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
I'm doing great, and as I said, I was not aware of this UFO correlation with volcanoes, and that there's so much footage of UFOs going into volcanoes. How long have you known about it? And could you talk about that a little bit to start in your documentary?
Yeah, um, it's been a while since I've covered that documentary. You're thinking of Volcanic UFO Mysteries, which it's a documentary I made actually with Jaime Maussan. And the interesting thing about that documentary is that there's two really active volcanoes in Mexico. There's the fiery Colima um, volcano, which is to the west of Mexico City. And then pretty much like really close to Mexico City, just north of it, near a city of Puebla, is Popocatépetl, which is a super active volcano. It erupts like almost every year. And back in 1988, the volcano called Colima was erupting, and news crews were just recording video of it during the daytime. And you could see in this footage from 19, I think it was 1988, might have been the early 90s, forgive me. Um, you could see that this disc, sort of oblong shaped object that's kind of a different color from the smoke and pyroclastic flows that are exploding out of this volcano. You can see this object just slowly moving through the ash cloud and eventually going on the other side of the volcano and off into the sky. And um, it's important to note that any commercial plane would not be able to like circumvent the effects of an actively erupting volcano. So the ash that's in the air, the ionosphere is like supercharged. It can fry the electronics and um, all that stuff that's inside of the airplane. And then the heat, it's not like it's not safe for a plane at all to go through an ash cloud or anywhere close to an erupting volcano. In fact, I think in Iceland, maybe 6 years ago, there was a volcano that like downed most of the airports in Europe. They shut down air travel because the ash cloud itself could mess up planes that are flying through that airspace. So, um, really weird situation there, really strange video. And, in that documentary, also cover all the active video sightings that have happened around Popocatépetl. Popocatépetl, um, it has, because it's so close to the population of Puebla, which is like a city of 2 million that's just north of Mexico City, and Mexico City is 30 million. Um, the government of Mexico set up these special cameras to constantly watch Popocatépetl while it was erupting, or if it wasn't erupting, just to keep an eye on it and make sure that conditions were safe for people that are living around the volcano. And it seems that all the time there's been these government controlled cameras that record in FLIR. They also record in just normal light spectrum, showing objects parked right beside the volcano, going into the volcano at night, going up to the volcano while it's erupting, like really strange video footage. So yeah, that's and you know, Jaime Maussan's a pretty interesting character. He's been all over the news with the Nazca mummies and stuff recently. I don't really agree that the Nazca mummies are aliens. Maybe there's some other, I don't know, type of humanoid that's human, but it's more likely that a lot of them are fakes, just like constructed for fanfare. But he's done a lot of good work, and at one time I was making some documentaries with him.
So what do you think is going on with these UFOs and volcanoes? I heard him in one of your in that documentary theorizing that there could be a base under there, but there's also people saying that they could be getting energy from the volcano.
Yeah, he did mention that a Discovery Channel team and a group of scientists from, I think, Norway, a University of Norway, went and looked at um, Popocatépetl when it was pretty much about to erupt. They can tell some of this data based on seismic activity and apparently electromagnetic energy that's being built up in the magma chamber underneath these volcanoes. And Jaime says that a UFO was observed by the team at the time going over the volcano, and afterwards, instead of erupting, it seemed to just dissipate. So he theorized that the UFO was siphoning energy from it. I don't know.
Now, as far as these underwater submerged objects, a lot of people don't realize that these objects are transmedium in most cases. Um, for those that aren't aware about underwater submerged objects, in your opinion, are these things that are only underwater, or are they coming from space or wherever they're coming from in the atmosphere?
Honestly, I think they come from anywhere and everywhere. Um, my latest documentary, which is covering water-based sightings, which I'm actually going to be showing. If people come to contact in the desert, they can pull up a chair and watch on Sunday night for free. Essentially, I interviewed Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, former retired Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. He was with the Navy for 32 years. 7 of those years, he was the chief oceanographer, the head of oceanography for the Navy. He also worked for NOAA, which, is a very important scientific agency that's always monitoring atmospheric conditions, ocean conditions around the planet. And he's a pretty smart guy. And while he was on active duty, when he was doing service for the Navy, he witnessed the Go Fast UFO come through on his email with a whole chain of command and other people involved on this military exercise out at sea at the time. This would have been around the same time that Ryan Graves, pilot who famously saw off the coast, I think, of Virginia there, a sphere shaped UFO within a cube that nearly collided with the wing of his craft. So around the same time, the Go Fast UFO was recorded, and that was shared in an email on a classified, encrypted email server the Navy uses called IPSEC. And this admiral was astonished. He said in the documentary immediately he thought this was of extraterrestrial origin because we don't officially have any technology like that within the Navy, within the Air Force. We're talking about a spear shaped object that's flying against the wind in the middle of the ocean, you know, and NASA has done their part to debunk the speed that that object was moving, but what is it? And why was it in the middle of this airspace? And why was it being brought to the attention of all of these Navy members that were thinking of scrapping their exercise out at the middle of the ocean, which takes a long time to plan, um, and the safety of flight risk because many of these objects were being observed. Um, what is it? And in the documentary we cover like the history of these objects showing up either coming from the ocean or going into the ocean or just being over the ocean and their effects on water. So and submarines. We also cover like Navy submariners that have witnessed these objects while they were in a submarine, from the sonar booth or perspective. Um, so it seems like these objects are operating with technology that's way above anything that we have in our military arsenals around the world that is known. I think the Russians know about it. Richard Dolan in the documentary talks about a former Russian general, Vladimir Zaza, who quite profusely explained that there have been sightings all around Russian waters, and they actually had a USO research program during the former Soviet Union's military days. And the Americans have to know about it. The Canadians probably know about it. I interviewed Chris Stiles, who researched the Shag Harbor incident from 1976, and recently published a new book about the Shelburne incident called Sweep Clear 5, in which an object was seen going into the ocean, possibly two. A NATO operation was put together so that they could dive and see what had gone down in 1960 off the coast of Shelburne. This is Nova Scotia area of Canada. And apparently, through the sort of Freedom of Information Act request that Chris Stiles did in Canada, he got the logs from that mission and he found out that um, after the divers went down to see this object, they were so spooked, the ship went to DEFCON 1, which is the highest DEFCON level you can go to. It's like nuclear war imminent type thing. And supposedly in history, we've never gone to DEFCON 1. So it's a pretty strange case. And I think these objects, I mean, if you think of people like David Grush coming forward, they could be of multiple different origins. They could be extraterrestrial, they could be extra dimensional if science can prove that. And they could be, possibly a non human intelligence that is not either of those, that is just, I guess, living in the oceans that we haven't fully become aware of. You know, a higher intelligence that eludes our perception for a long time. And there's people like Hal Puthoff who wrote an ultra terrestrials thesis paper in the past few years. Um, he basically talks about all of those options scientifically, and Lou Alzondo has touched on that sort of too.
Now, Hal Puthoff and Lou Elizondo are both, or I don't know if they still are, but they were part of Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy for a while. Now I've heard Tom DeLonge say that some of these nuclear tests underwater with nuclear bombs may have been in reality to deal with underwater or unidentified submerged objects. Have you heard at all about that?
I have overheard that. I know that Bikini Atoll, when we were doing those nuclear bomb tests in the 1940s off the coast of Bikini Atoll in the west, um, there have been pictures that have come out where UFOs are seen flying away from the mushroom cloud, like saucer-shaped disc things. There's people like Phil Schneider who even said that there was supposedly submerged bases that were in that area that the United States military possibly were also trying to target at the same time as testing these bombs. I don't know if it's true, but these are rumors, and I don't know if Tom DeLonge has proof to prove these claims.
Yeah, he also said that Operation, I think, Starfish Prime, where they blew up a nuclear bomb in space during the Cold War times, was actually related to knocking out some UFOs from space, because he was saying that it may have been a collaboration with Russia. Russia may have actually allowed it because they may have also been aware of these space issues, and that's why it didn't actually cause a nuclear war at that time, because tensions were so high. But again, he didn't really say much detail about that. But it is a little weird, blowing up nuclear bombs in space.
Yeah, because the radiation, even like that, comes back down to Earth. It's if you don't do it properly, right? Um, but I have not even heard of that story.
Well, have you heard anything about, from talking to the military people, possible defenses against this type of intelligence?
Like, in what way?
Like we have heard that maybe there is some sort of negative effect on how they fly, from nuclear bombs going off, and that may be one of the reasons why they're interested in nuclear silos and nuclear energy, or it could be environmental. I don't know, but if there were to be like some sort of conflict, do you think they're just far too advanced that we would have absolutely no defense, or do you think that our military has some type of defense? If they're not, who knows if they're even in contact with them or not? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the rumor has it that we've been in contact and had some kind of agreement in the past, right? There's no proof of that, though. It's just a rumor. It's an interesting story. But I think what's most likely is that the Pentagon and the militaries of the world that partner up with them, the Five Eyes, let's say Australia, Canada, UK, um, Britain, uh, who else is there? United States. So, I mean, you've got basically all these militaries of the world that don't want to admit that they're outclassed and outfoxed by a technology and possibly a higher intelligence. That's probably what it comes down to. And I don't think this non human intelligence that has been interacting with us wants to enslave us or destroy us. Maybe exploit, because we exploit people, we exploit the third world, whatever. There might be a non human intelligence that's interested in certain aspects of our planet that they would prefer to either not interact with us and exploit, or maybe even human beings could be seen as something exploitable. But there's no proof.
Now, in your documentary, there's several about UFOs and bases potentially on the moon and various missions that astronauts have taken and kind of seen some unusual stuff. Plus, you go through with some experts some unusual pictures that have been taken
Yeah.
on the moon. What do you think's going on the moon? I guess you call it the far side of the moon, or that's what it's known as, where all this suspicious activity is supposedly taking place.
I mean, some of it is happening all over the moon. There's been videos and pictures that have been shared from the side that faces the moon as well, from many of the early um, the project. So Apollo manned missions were the first for man to go around the moon. But before that, you had the lunar orbiter, which was a satellite built to photograph the whole lunar landscape. And they used those missions to plan out where they were going to land during the manned missions. So during those photos from the lunar orbiter, some investigators and a fellow Canadian that I partnered up with for this series called Secret Space UFOs, he went by the name of Luna Cognita. He did a whole bunch of research and poured through the Lunar Surface Journal, which is a repository that the Apollo manned mission photos were dumped to online. And that database got updated subsequently after researchers like him downloaded those photos and in Photoshop, enhanced and changed lighting and stuff and found that there were structures on the moon, on the far side of the moon, and even on um, the face that faces Earth all the time. There's only one side of the moon that we ever see. The moon doesn't rotate like spin like the Earth does. The moon just it rotates around the Earth, but it stays facing one side only. And strangely enough, the Apollo manned missions, they targeted certain areas that researchers like Richard Hoagland, Richard C. Hoagland, and Mike Barra investigated photography that was taken during the Apollo missions, and found that there was all kinds of strange structuring, like glass-like structures. It almost looked like scaffolding over the lunar surface in the distance above the horizon of the lunar surface. And just like Mons Hadley, a strange mountain area that supposedly looks like there's a pyramid structure there. All these really strange anomalies that should not occur on this planetoid if it really is just a rock that formed billions of years ago when the Earth formed, and is nothing but geologic and selenologic material.
Do you believe that some of these things are still active, or are these objects that may have been used in the past and now they're kind of abandoned?
Yeah, I think there's probably, in my mind, if there was technology that is ancient on the moon that seems highly advanced, but now the moon is just this derelict, bombed out, um, you know, lifeless place, it could be possible that the technology that's still there is autonomous. And that goes for some of the UFO sightings. I think it's possible that some of the UFOs that we're dealing with might not be manned craft. They could be autonomous, artificially intelligently run craft that could be probes from a higher intelligence, right? Um, so the moon might have some of that sort of technology just crawling around it. And there's a book called Who is on the Moon, I think. And it shows photos of tracks that are fresh on the moon going in and out of craters, like some kind of rover type um, um, machine that is going over the lunar landscape, even back in the 1960s, before we even had remote technology like that. Um, we have rovers on Mars, but that came way later. We didn't have that back in like the 60s and 70s on the moon. Or that could be deeply classified, and we do have some of that stuff. But I know that China right now is really interested in landing on the far side of the moon, the dark side of the moon, which is a nickname. It does get sunlight, but recently the head of NASA, the NASA administrator, um, came out and said that when he was asked in a congressional hearing why China would be so interested in landing on the far side of the moon, he said that he didn't know why. And he said, furthermore, that NASA does not know what's on the far side of the moon, which is total BS because we were mapping the far side of the moon with our orbiters and the Clementine mission and every type of satellite you can think of. So were the Russians for like since the 1960s. So how could we not know what's on the far side of the moon? I think China is probably trying to pick up some of this ancient technology or check it out the same way we were back in the 1960s and early 70s.
Yeah, I interviewed Paul Hellyer before he passed away. For anyone that doesn't know, he was the highest ranked official to officially go on the record about UFOs,
In
I
Canada.
believe. Yeah, from Canada. And he said NASA were liars because they act like we should be all excited to fly little micros in far off planets. And he's like, they're very aware that we're currently being visited.
Oh yeah. So I believe he was the Minister of Defense during the earlier Trudeau era, not Pierre Trudeau. He
Yeah,
served under
Pierre
Pierre
Elliott
Trudeau.
Trudeau.
And he wasn't interested in UFOs originally. He was just, regular dude, maybe a wrestler. No, I'm just joking. But he
He
read
was a
Colonel,
pilot though. He was a pilot, so he's aware of stuff like that.
yeah, and he was interested in the phenomenon after he read Colonel Jay Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. Um, and the NASA administrator, sorry, before his name, I didn't mention, is Bill Nelson. So if people go on Twitter or go on YouTube and search Bill Nelson says, we don't know what's on the backside of the moon or why China's going there, you can find it. But yeah, I mean, Paul Hellyer was a pretty interesting guy, outside the box thinker. He used his intelligence and um, government contacts from his earlier days to dig into the UFO issue in the United States and spoke to Colonel Jay Corso before he passed, and then got read into all kinds of stuff in the US and apparently in Canada. Um, and so I think he was a pretty prolific man. He wrote many different books about extraterrestrials and UFOs and stuff. And I actually was friends with Mike Hellier, his grandson, in high school, and used to get drunk over at his house. But yeah, Paul Hellier is a pretty interesting character. And what was I going to say? I mean, he left some pretty big shoes to fill, but then you've got guys like Larry Maguire, who works within HR of Canada, the Canadian Parliament to some degree. He's a minister, and Jeremy Corbell put out that letter that was of Larry Maguire imploring Anita Anand, the former defense minister for Canada, to read the Canadian public into the UAP issue in lockstep with the United States, although the United States really isn't doing that much right now in terms of the disclosure train. That that seems to be stalled right now, but hopefully we're going to be getting some more congressional hearings and government oversight committee meetings about UAP. And I would love to have Canada open up their UFO books, their UAP documents, because I'm sure they have them. You know, they have to.
Why do you think it doesn't seem to be as big a news story in Canada as the US, all this UFO stuff? Because I find overall when I talk to I've been to the US a lot and people seem to know more about what's going on than here. You almost have to like explain to people from the start, no, this is real. The US government has admitted it. And then you start telling them about the hearings and everything, just because it gets so little coverage here. I think in the Ottawa Citizen newspaper, the last congressional hearing, my father still gets the newspaper. He cut it out. There was no picture. There was just like a little blurb in the newspaper about this massive congressional hearing about UFOs.
I honestly think Canada is not the right place. I mean, there's a handful of Canadians that probably take interest in this issue. And most of them have reached out to me on social media. So that's why I know there's not many. But, you know, Chrissy Newton is from Toronto. She runs the debrief. Um, and then you've got she runs it with MJ Benias, but Benias is more of a debunker. He's kind of like an illiterate on the UFO history. Um, but Shag Harbor, Chris Stiles, you know, he's an old school UFO guy. Um, you've got what's his name? Have you ever spoken to the guy out of Winnipeg? He's like partnered up with Nicole Sackage all the time.
He's talking about the Falcon Lake landing a lot.
Yeah, yeah. What's his name again?
No. I
Frig.
forget, but I've seen him talk about that, and that's like Canada's version of Roswell for anyone that doesn't know.
Well, Shag Harbor is also considered like Roswell because there were so many like residents that saw this over the course of a few days. Lights in the sky, then the crash in the ocean, and divers going down. Like Chris Stiles interviewed the divers, and they said they saw non-human intelligence in the ocean when they went down. They came up and were like, "That wasn't human," and we don't know what the hell that is, but you know, they don't need our rescuing. They were all spooked. Um, so that's probably one of the best documented Canadian cases, in my opinion. And the other Canadian guy from Winnipeg, his name will come to me. I don't think he likes me too much, but yeah. Uh, let me think about that. Where are you? Come back.
Yeah, I was trying to look up his name, but as far as the UFO in space and everything, What do you think the astronauts know? Because there's been a lot of astronauts that are famous astronauts that have gone on the record saying that they exist and that they've seen unusual stuff, but for some reason, people as highly credible as them, I think Edgar Mitchell is one of them, is just they're not taken seriously, even though these are incredibly honorable, incredible people. What are some of the astronaut stories you've encountered related to astronaut encounters with UFO?
There's a lot. So the very first NASA piloted missions where we flew at apogee outside the Earth's atmosphere in these specially designed rocket propelled planes that were mounted onto the edge of a modified B 2 bomber's wing. That was called the X-15 missions. And two pilots that flew those missions, the very first pilot, Joe White, noticed a UFO tracking his craft when he was up there. And then I think it's Robert Walker. Yeah, he was one of the later X-15 pilots, and he noticed 5 UFOs, a few above him, and I think 2 others alongside of him. And he was doing a lecture later on when he was a retired astronaut, and he brought a picture on from being at outside the Earth's atmosphere of a UFO that was above the Earth's horizon in space. And I cover that case with the help of Carrie Martinuk in my documentary, NASA's First Missions, Secret Space UFOs, NASA's First Missions. So just from the very beginning, the outset of NASA's astronaut missions, they saw stuff. And Robert Walker even said that it was part of their manned missions to look for things like that because NASA knew that that stuff was up there, but it was a secret, right, from the public. Then you go to the first capsule missions. You've got the Mercury manned capsule missions where they launch this rocket, the capsule breaks off, and it orbits around Earth and then crashes down in the ocean. You have the famous Fireflies incident where an astronaut on, I think I can't remember which Mercury mission, but that astronaut witnessed all these lights. Now, later on, it was realized that that was actually just a undocumented and unrecognized phenomenon where these hydrogen, or no, not hydrogen, these like water molecules basically were floating around the capsule, and the sun was catching light in them, and it made them look like they were glowing like fireflies. But it just showed when he was doing his very first mission, he was so distracted by these like supposed UFOs, and it was kind of like a War of the Worlds moment where everybody on the radio and TV that was trying to tune into that to hear what the astronaut was seeing was hearing about like these strange objects circulating his capsule, which he said they look like fireflies. What are they and stuff? So that piqued the world's interest in what could be out there. But then you have the Gemini manned missions, and during the Gemini manned missions, which Buzz Aldrin was on, he was on Gemini 11. These were also capsule missions that flew around the Earth, and they tested spacewalks in their spacesuits and stuff, and then went back in the capsule and crashed into the ocean on the planet. They witnessed many different strange objects out there. And when you look at the declassified transcripts from the astronauts talking, these conversations were recorded. They weren't all televised or sent down to earth on radio for the public to hear. They were recorded on these like flight black boxes, which during the Gemini missions they were called the VTR, and that transcriber was then later on, you know, documented on paper and classified for 12 years. And when those papers were declassified, UFO researchers poured through them and saw that on many of the Gemini missions, you know, famously Frank Borman on Gemini 7, he said, "We've got a bogey." And bogey usually means unidentified craft or an enemy craft in Air Force terms. And he was an Air Force guy. There was 3 Air Force guys. The rest of the pilots from Gemini and the Apollo manned missions were Navy. So he declared that they had a bogey. But I think what happened earlier on in the Gemini missions, where Scott Carpenter got distracted by a UFO or seeing something strange when he was on his mission, he got back down to Earth. He missed his landing target. He missed his reentry vector, like where he was supposed to go, because he was so distracted by something he saw up there. NASA fired him. And I think that was the starting of teaching pilots, astronauts that were going to be in space, not to talk about that issue. And it carried on throughout the Apollo manned missions. You know, Edgar Mitchell never said that he saw a UFO when he was in space or saw strange, what do you call it, structures on the moon, but he was very interested in the UFO topic, and he grew up in Roswell, and he spoke to many of the residents, the sheriff, and all these people that witnessed the Roswell, New Mexico crash of 1947. And he knew from a young age that that was a cover up. And then he became friends with people like Stephen Greer and got read into through the CIA from some former CIA member that there was a cover up, there was a UFO crash retrieval program, that there was possibly a reproduction or reverse engineering program. And he was very adamant that we were not alone, that non-human intelligence was interacting with our planet, and that it was being kept from the public. But yeah, it's more than Edgar Mitchell. There's so many astronauts that had experiences that either went on the record or recanted going on the record, like Buzz Aldrin, which I cover in Apollo 1 to 11. I got a chance to interview famous UFO director James Fox about his experience trying to document and get this testimony from Buzz Aldrin about his experience with supposed a UFO tracking the Apollo 11 spacecraft to the moon when they first were on the way to land on the moon. And supposedly, yeah, Story Musgrave, Gordon Cooper. So supposedly Buzz Aldrin saw something. Neil Armstrong, they all saw something, but Buzz changed his story over the years, and he didn't want to talk about it. And when James Fox went to meet with him in Europe to get the goods, Buzz basically ghosted him and said he wasn't going to add to the UFO fire, and he didn't want to give his testimony. So, yeah, Story Musgrave, he saw this, like, there's a video online of an STS mission in which he saw what looked like almost like a worm or something in space. There's Leroy Chow that saw 3 lights in a triangular pattern fly over him during a a mission on the ISS. Um, and Gordon Cooper didn't see one in space. People say that he might have, but his testimony was that he saw one when in the 1950s when he was a test pilot. I think it was might be out at Nellis Air Force Base. He saw a craft land on the dry lake bed, and they apparently filmed it with 16 millimeter film footage. Um, and then he called the appropriate um, personnel that were higher ranking to ask what they wanted to do with this footage. And some men showed up that were, kind of fit the description of a men in black, like, no known military fatigues or rankings or anything, and just confiscated or actually, that's wrong. He apparently mailed the footage and never saw it again. So,
Yeah, I heard that story as well. You've also done a movie, Being Taken, about abductions, which a lot of people say one of the reasons the governments might not come clean about UFOs is because of the abduction phenomenon. You have Travis Walton in this movie, who I've interviewed as well. What are your thoughts on the abduction phenomenon?
I think the abduction phenomenon is real. Um, I think there's some incredible cases that just have tons of evidence to prove that something actually happened. Um, I look like Seamus. You've got
It's a wrestler that has red hair. Someone thinks you look like him.
Seamus. I don't know. Basically, Betty and Barney Hill is one of the most famous cases. Mixed race couple, 1960s, driving down the road with their car, saw a UFO off in the sky. Apparently, it came up close, shut down their car. The Air Force was involved investigating that. They took radiation samples from the hood of their car, samples from their clothes because they were like torn and stuff like that. And you got Travis Walton, who's got 4 witnesses that saw him in Snowflake, Arizona, getting zapped by this UFO. They thought he was dead and he was missing for 4 days, comes back and passes all the lie detector tests. I think 10 were administered to that group of people. And I think that's a home run case. Pascagoula 73, the Mississippi case involving Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson. Um, uncle and nephew get abducted while fishing on a river. And that was investigated by J. Allen Hynek. He said that it was a very credible case and he thought it was real. And I think it was Alan Harder, James Harder, that also went down and investigated that and thought it was real. And the Air Force interviewed the men and took radiation samples of them. And there was a medical doctor that noticed that they had wounds that were odd, that were, I guess, matched up with their story of where they felt pain or punctures when they were taken on board the craft. But you have all kinds of abduction cases that are smaller, that are from around the world, and I think that are overlooked. And that is something I'm probably going to look into in like an experience or documentary in the future.
Yeah, some are a lot more credible than others. What do you think is doing the abductions? Do you think it's all the same race of aliens, or do you think it could be various different ones? Because we always hear the Greys a lot are doing abductions, but of course Travis Walton had a more Nordic type alleged being. I guess we don't really know if there's races or not because there's not enough proof.
Well, I think you hear in Travis Walton's case two things that he saw. When he first woke up, he saw these creatures with pale skin that were shorter than him, that had large, like gray type skulls, but they had really large eyes that seemed to have color. So they weren't like the typical gray that just had large black almond shaped eyes. Um, and he was like getting a bit violent and aggressive. So they backed out of the room, and they disappeared. And when he was like in a bridge sort of area of this ship, like a chair with a console, he said that two attractive looking Nordics um, came up to him. He tried talking to them. They didn't say anything. They were wearing like these tight fitting blue um, jumpsuits type things, like skin tight. But Betty and Barney Hill, they didn't see Greys. They just saw the same sort of thing, like these creatures that had big heads, big eyes, but they had irises and white to their eye. So the Greys, have been witnessed by other credible experiencers, like the Ariel School um, witnesses. Those children saw creatures that had big black almond shaped eyes, and some of them thought that they appeared to have hair, and others just said they had big heads, but they were moving really quickly and stuff. Randall Nickerson, who made that documentary, he is an experiencer, and he says that he was taken at night from his own home by Grace that fit that description. And, you know, there's guys like Charles Hall that report these like tall whites or whatever, but I don't know enough about cases like that.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Charles Hall stuff. What are your thoughts on that? He seems like a highly credible guy who's obviously very intelligent and he goes into great detail about stuff. But on the books, he has an excuse about it. He claims that they're fiction,
Yeah,
but he
I
says
think
they're
they are
really
fiction.
nonfiction. Yeah.
I think they are fiction, and I think his story is fiction too. Um,
If you
Unfortunately,
read the books too, he puts himself, to use a wrestling term, he puts himself over a lot in the books, like he's some sort of like Superman
superhero.
type. Yeah.
I actually saw him do a speech in Australia back when I was like living there, and yeah, I didn't find him believable. Maybe some people do, and maybe it's blasphemy for me to say that, but to each their own. Truth is what you make it. But I don't find him very credible. I think he came to the UFO community and wrote some books to entertain people. That's just my thoughts.
By the way, this is Seamus.
Wow, that
So he
guy's
wasn't.
that guy's way more red than me. Way more red.
So you've also done some books, or you've done a documentary on Sasquatch, which is called Sasquatch Among Wild Men. BC is known for having Sasquatch where you are
Yeah.
now. What could you tell us about them?
Well, that's how I got into Sasquatch. I wasn't really. I thought UFOs were crazy enough, and that maybe I was already in the deep end enough. But you know, why not just go completely crazy and make a documentary about Sasquatch? But the interesting thing is that I ended up becoming convinced that there is a cryptid. Um, Some people call it Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the same thing. It's just the word Sasquatch comes from a Canadian man, J.W. Burns, who was living on the native reserves in British Columbia in the 1800s. And he kept hearing about the Stehalis tribe's tales of the Sasket, which he mispronounced, and he called it the Sasquatch instead of Sasket. But if you go to Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia today, they still have the totems. They still have a festival every summer called Sasquatch Days. And it's very important to their culture and to their heritage, the Sasket. And there's other there's a tribe on the island of British Columbia, Vancouver Island, that call the Sasquatch Zunaqua, which is like a trickster creature, ape-like creature that's in their totem. And there's a tribe from the Oregon area called I can't remember what they're called, but they call the Sasquatch Skookum. And so there's all these different names in the native culture, and the natives were the first on the continent here. They were the first, indigenous people of Canada and the United States. All these different tribes have reports and a history of seeing wild men, like these forest creatures or ape-like men that are, the masters of that domain. And I think sometimes we come across them, sometimes they come across us, and we usually part ways.
What did you make of that video that came out? I believe it was last year. I'll put up a picture from it of that Sasquatch that they spotted from a train in Colorado. Did
That's
you
like
see this?
standing up on the side of the hill or whatever, or it's
Yeah,
walking and then it like crouches down. I think that got
yeah.
debunked, didn't it?
If it did, I never heard about it. It could have been, but it was interesting footage anyways.
Yeah, it was interesting. I looked at it, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sure what to make of that. And I think it's pretty easy these days to throw on like a, a bear or an ape suit and traipse around in the forest and, you know, get your buddy to record it and say, oh, we caught a video of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, right? But I think the older footage is better, like the Patterson Gimlin film. That's been really well documented and proven through photogeometry and stuff that the creatures stood around 7, 6, 8 foot tall, and had a stooped walking posture and like a cone shaped head that you see usually on like a gorilla. They have that sagittal crest where all the muscles from their jaw and stuff anchor to, um, you know, which helps them in chewing foliage and sticks and stuff like that. But yeah, that specimen in the Patterson Gimlin film looks real. Um, and there's a couple other footages which I've included like small clips of in my documentaries that I think look real. But people have asked me, do you think Sasquatch is like an alien or is like a dimension jumping being or something like that? And I don't. There's no proof of that. What there is proof is hair samples, footprints, like that go for hundreds of yards into the forest. And most of these researchers take a cast of one or two, and they don't want to follow forever because they got things to do with their day. Um, and on the rare occasion, like in Sasquatch Among Wild Men, I talked to these guys who are from Washington State who started up a research group called um, the Olympic Project, and they go into the Olympic National Park in Washington there, and they found what looks like um, carefully woven stick beds that are made of branches of like um, different types of trees and bushes in the area, and these like stick mattresses basically sit off the ground up to like 4 feet or 6 feet, and they're made for very large bodies, and that could be a living area. I think they've got some pretty interesting stuff to talk about there, and there's been sightings in the Olympic National Park. The whole Pacific Northwest is a hotbed for Bigfoot, Sasquatch sightings. Like, that's where the Patterson Gimlin footage is Northern California, which is the Pacific Northwest. This is a clinal rainforest. Washington is the same. British Columbia, the same. And, you see them in Oregon. That's the same thing. Um, you see them all over North America, but I think where you see some of the most credible sightings is in the Pacific Northwest, and that's where the history has always been.
And just to bring up Tom DeLonge again, I don't know if you saw his Sasquatch photo, but again, it's that's nothing conclusive, but he had said one of his friends had taken that one.
That would be California, probably, right?
Yeah,
Cool.
they were camping or something.
Well, I'm not going to say anything against Tom DeLonge because I don't want to be like, excommunicated
Yeah.
from the UFO church.
Yeah. No, and the other thing I just want to, I don't know if you ever look into this, but I have to ask you because you're from BC, and when I was a kid, I was always very obsessed with Ogopogo. And you mentioned cryptids. That's obviously an alleged sea
Somebody
monster.
has
There is,
told me, yeah, to look into that. That's the like Kelowna area cryptid, right? That lives in the Okanagan.
yeah,
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 it's like the Loch Ness of Canada. I haven't
yeah.
looked into it enough. People will say that they still see strange things in the Okanagan region today, but um, and I think there's like one famous photo of Ogopogo, but it's from like the 1960s, and I wonder why. If you look at like the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, um, there's phenomenon. There's like photos after photos after photo and videos and film from every decade. So there has to be something there. Same with UFOs. We can't get enough of this. We keep recording these things throughout history. Why is there not a lot of Ogopogo photos or, Loch Ness for that matter?
Yeah. I know that there is some new footage of it if you look hard enough, but you have a very good point. Everyone having cell phone cameras now. The last thing I'll ask you about here, you also did a movie about the Men in Black. What could you tell us about the Men in Black, which a lot of people don't believe in?
The bad guys dress in black. Remember that. No, I don't know. They're I think the Men in Black are just three-letter agency agents that are trying to information control and suppress the truth about UFOs, top secret technology that's being tested by the Americans or whoever. And it just depends on which witness that has seen this stuff gets intercepted by a certain agent from one of these agencies. So I interviewed Richard Doty for that documentary. People have said he's a man in black because here's a guy who worked for the Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigations. He's openly admitted that he was hired to basically go out and intercept experiencers, UFO witnesses, whether that was our craft or someone else's, um, that could be debatable. And he says it could be both, but they would do everything they could to either convince you that it was extraterrestrial craft when it was ours, or if it wasn't ours, they still wanted to get your photos, they wanted to get your testimony, so that they had better intelligence over the phenomenon. And you have other cases throughout history, like the Anchorage, Alaska incident with JAL Airlines. I think it was like in the 1980s, 1986, this object that looked like the size of Jupiter to them, or like a miniature sun in the sky, appeared. They tried to go around or get away from it, and they were doing massive big turns in the sky. It emitted two smaller objects that were shooting beams of light into their cockpit, highly distressing and well documented within the FAA. A individual who saw the documentation, heard about the incident when it happened, John Callahan, he got to research it fresh after the incident happened as he was working for the FAA. And he kept a copy of all the documentation, which later got released through Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. But John Callahan said that there was a meeting called with all the senior staff on his team that were investigating this. They were called into a room. CIA showed up. They said, "You're never to speak of this," and they confiscated all the documentation. But he kept a copy because he knew something might be coming like that. So that's a man in black, but it's just another three-letter agency. And I'm sure the FBI could intercept and control certain things. You've got the NSA. Mike Ripsecker was in that documentary. He was a former NSA agent and knew about their tactics of information control. You've got all kinds of three-letter agencies. The DIA, I guess, if you're a military army personnel and you witness something, maybe a DIA agent will come out and debrief you and say, "Don't speak about this." It's all about information control. I think that's what the Men in Black phenomenon is. If you talk to people like Dan Aykroyd, you should get him on the show. He's another great Canadian that's experienced a Men in Black incident. When his show about UFOs got canned some years ago, he said he witnessed a Man in Black the day that his show got canceled, and that really spooked him. And he's pretty involved in ufology. He's a great researcher, and I'd love to speak with him someday about it.
Yeah, he only lives about 2 hours away from here. I think he lives just outside of Kingston, Ontario.
Get a bottle of Crystal Skull and sit across from him, man.
Yeah. Yeah,
Maybe
I'm sure he's
maybe
not the
maybe
easiest guy to
Patron.
contact. I hear he
No,
still actually goes out in Kingston though. Like he'll go to a restaurant or a grocery store sometimes in Kingston and he'll be spotted. So he goes without bodyguards and stuff, but I'm sure you
he's
can't
got a
just like email.
place. I think he's got a place in LA. Like he's all over the map. He's got like nice properties and stuff. He likes to be left alone. I reached out to him too through Crystal Skull Vodka's like email. They just said no.
Someone wants to know if you met Bob Lazar. I'm gonna guess no. Maybe you will one day though.
No, maybe. I mean, he's pretty reclusive, and uh, Jeremy Corbell, he's the guy. He's the Bob Lazar guy. He got the big get. And I think there's these new guys that are making a documentary about Bob Lazar. I can't remember what it's called, like Graviton or something like that. But He's a pretty hard guy to speak to.
Yeah, and I just gotta ask you, I've heard recently, and I'm not really that familiar with it. What's this controversy going on with David Grush right now? Do you know about it?
David Grush, no. You're probably talking about this new whistleblower that came out, who goes by the name of Jason Sands. And he's going to be featured in a new James Fox documentary. Um, I don't think he's very credible. And there's a lot of people that think the same way in the UFO community, the UAP community, but there's people that think he is credible. I think what killed it for me was when he mentioned that he took part in these 20 and back uh, secret space missions. And strangely enough, the alien that he met was a blue alien, which is very synonymous with the Corey Good story. And as people may note, the Corey Good story has been pretty well debunked now. He's said in some testimony with a deposition in a court case recently that he made the whole story up and that it's part of his intellectual property. It was basically entertainment, and he never went to space once. He considered it sort of like a mental download or some kind of etheric, like out of body experience or something, which is completely opposite to what his original story was. Jason Sands, when I asked him on this Twitter space that he debuted on this past weekend to give clarity, he said, yeah, I took part in something like that. He could have taken that moment to say, no, the 20 and back or whatever that I'm referring to has nothing to do with Corey, and I never did anything like that. And, he didn't say that. He said he was uncomfortable to speak about it, and that, you know, anybody who's confused about that answer or says that he's confused about that answer, I mean, you don't have to step in and protect him. He's a grown man. Those are his words. And I'm sure um, what you're going to have when people like David Grush come to the public uh, and this invigorated mass interest in the UFO subject around the world, really, you're going to have more and more people step into this space and make incredible claims. And it's possible not all of them are going to be true. Um, I'm not, his military service checks out. He did say that he was human intel. It's shown on his DD 214, but the way that he's sold his experience was that he was signal intelligence, which is not true. So there's all these little things that are a bit of a stretch, and it just doesn't feel the same as when David Grush came out, or David Fravor, Ryan Graves, these people that we know witnessed something. We have footage and reports, well documented information about things that they were involved in. And David Grush was part of the UAP task force. Jason Sands said that he's like best buddies with David Grush, and was it's possible he was interviewed for the UAP task force, but I don't. Tim McMillan recently said that Jason Sands is not one of the 40 whistleblowers that David Grush has mentioned have yet to come forward. So, in my opinion, that's my opinion. Don't shoot me.
Very, very interesting. Well, I like that you research your stuff well. You have credible people in your documentaries. I've interviewed some credible and non-credible people on here. Some of them I haven't realized they're non-credible till I have them on, but people can watch and make their own opinions. But you're very good with your research. Where can people find your movies?
Amazon Prime. Apple TV, and another popular platform that's completely free is tubetv.com. That's where many of my films are in Canada, the US, Australia, different all around the world. You can see a bunch of my films. But if you want to check out, I'm on Twitter at my moniker is at Occult Journeys. Instagram, it's Darcy Weir Films, and yeah, my website is occultjourneys.com.
And of course, Contact in the Desert
Are you
coming up. You're
going?
actually going to be showing. I found out about it too late, and that's a really expensive flight from Ottawa, but I will go next year. It's just not enough time to plan it out for this year.
Sounds good,
It
man. Let's
sounds
do it
amazing though. Yeah, it sounds absolutely amazing. And I'll be more known in UFOs by next year, and I'm sure you're gonna have more films out by then as well.
for sure. For sure.
So I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans. Thanks for coming on and sharing all that information. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Hannibal. Devin, it's been a great convo. I guess people should remain skeptical and also keep their mind open to whatever this phenomenon is. And yeah, check out my work and reach out to me through social media. I'm always down to chat with people that are interested in this subject matter.